We're bringing auditions back to the budget build. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Week 5 of the Fordyce Budget Build-Off. In this series, Matt from the Scale Builders Guild and myself took the Vanquish VS4-10 Fordyce RTR, and we're upgrading it every week with a budget that's determined by chance. We're spinning the wheel of misfortune, as it's come to be my luck in this series, and that is determining what we spend on the build-off each week. Now, I was gone for a couple of weeks, so that caused us to skip last week, but Matt spun the wheel for me a couple of weeks back when I wasn't able to make the live stream takeover, and I was lucky enough to get a $75 budget for this week. Of course, Matt outdid me with his spin still, of course, but nonetheless, we're going to make the most of our budget this week, and I'm going to give you a couple of options of what we could be going with. One you may already see here on the back of this truck. What I wanted to tackle is I wanted to spice up the back side of the bed a little bit. And I've already installed one of the options here. Now, I've got a second option. I took and I designed up, or I sketched up initially 6 different designs for what I wanted to do with the rear of the bed. Just kind of did them as sketch drawings all over top of a photo. And I took and I posted that up on my Instagram. Kind of asked people which one of the 6 options that I drew people liked the best. And it was pretty much down between 2 of the options, number 5 and number 6. This was number 5. And what you see here is a 3D printed rear kind of bed rail roll hoop design. It's low profile, it's unobtrusive, but most importantly, I figured that it would probably have a pretty good chance of survival, as everything was pretty tight and pretty rigid overall. I designed this to go on in a pretty simple method. Of course, it's got the top portion of this with the tube structure that you see. And then it's held on with 2 clamps on each side that sandwich between the actual molded cage of the Fordyce rear bed. And then it's got a couple of screws that go in on the back side as well. But it's pretty simple, pretty unintrusive, and pretty easy to install. So I put this together, and this was one that I was kind of leaning towards. But while I was at it, since this was number 5 and number 6 was maybe the most popular, I decided to 3D print it as well. It's still here on the build plate of my bamboo, and this is a more traditional full-length back, but I left it on here so you kind of see the orientation and everything that I printed. It's just the standard orientation of the way that it would sit on the body. I used supports everywhere on this, pretty easy to clean out overall. The bamboo does a great job with slicing, and depending on your printer and your slicing settings, you may have a little bit different results, but overall not a bad part to have to remove everything. So this is a little bit more of a traditional kind of rear bed cage rack style. It's going to be further towards the back. The only worry that I have with this is that it's a longer unsupported area. I didn't really like the style of adding more tubes in there. I just didn't think that it looked that great. Now, if you've got a 3D printer and you don't mind just printing another one if something happens to it, then I think this one is a good looking option as well. So since we already have option 5 installed on the bed, I'm going to install this one, option 6. I'll let you guys decide which one we should leave on in the long run. On the bottom side of the cage, notice that there's these larger kind of recessed areas. Those are to go over top of the stock screws that hold the rear bed sides in place. You will need to put one hole in the back side of the bed sides, and I found the easiest way to do that is to get the bed put in place It'll kind of locate itself over top of those screws. And then you can poke in through the bottom with a body reamer while holding this down tight. The body reamer will only go in the place where the actual screw needs to go. With the rear piece sitting in place, you'll find the clamps. There's two styles of clamps. There's this one, which is a plain. Then there's also another one that I included that's got some additional holes, and that's to give you additional mounting in the bed in case you want to add things like a rack down the road. There's a couple of things that I'm thinking about designing that'll go in there, and I'll just include all of those STLs in place. But these little toe clamps are just going to go underneath and hook onto the bottom side of the actual molded bed and screw in through that hole on the 3D printed rear roll bar. Once you have all four of those clamps in place, then you'll want to do the last step, which is those rear holes we talked about. Now, I've got a 3D printed washer that goes along with them just to kind of help distribute the load, but just put your screw in through there, and these are going to go up through the bottom side of the bed into the roll bar, right through that hole that we've created in there. So, got the number 6 option swapped on. More of a long back roll bar setup. Also looks good. Again, I just think it's a little bit more vulnerable than the, lower profile back style that I had on there previously. So, but an easy little swap on. However, that's not all I wanted to do to the rear side of this body. One thing that I had drawn in the options while I was doing there was I filled in the back as like a tailgate, and a lot of people had mentioned that they really liked a tailgate option, so I thought that was something that we could also do. So I came up with a design and we've printed it out here. I've done kind of an inset rear section, put a HD logo in there as you can kind of see, but this is going to fill in around the contours of that rear bed, and it's a pretty easy little drop on. Now, to do this, I ended up making a couple of other little mounting brackets that I've already got installed here, and these just use 2 of the existing screws that are used to hold the rear taillight rings on. So you just back those out, you put these 2 3D printed pieces in and replace the screws, and then that gives us the mounting position for our new tailgate there. This is a super simple install, and it's just going to take 4 screws to put the tailgate and hold it in place. And in the end, it'll give us a pretty different style to the rear of this. It's just a pretty basic. It's got a tiny bit of curvature to match the little bit of curvature that those rear bed sides do. You can kind of adjust and fit things as needed. Depending on how you clamp down the roll cage, it may affect things a tiny bit, but more than anything, it's just kind of a gap filler to go in back there and change up the style a little bit. It is a 3D printed tailgate, so depending on how hard on things that you are, your mileage may vary, maybe print an extra. Now, of course, it's not color match, so depending on your level of care or how much that bothers you, you're either going to have to start mixing some paint, finding something close, or take a wild guess. But I kind of like the different style there. It's filled in. Thought that was a fun little mod. All this stuff we've done was just a couple of quick cosmetic changes, but not something that's actually going to affect much the performance of our truck. So figure we should get some of that done this week as well. Now this week we did have $75 for a budget, and we're not going to lose much for the 3D printed parts, which you'll find a link for in the description below. And all of these parts will just be in one bundle. So you can find that there. Pretty simple deal. But for our performance mods for the week, I want to add a little bit of overdrive percentage. So we're going to do that by underdriving our rear axle. Now, if you're newer to the scene, maybe you've heard overdrive a lot but don't 100% know it, we'll do a quick breakdown of what it is. Basically, it's the percent difference between the ratio of your front axle and rear axle. Generally, in trail trucks like this, you'll have the front axle spin faster than the rear, and that will aid you in climbing and in turning. Having a lot of overdrive can have downsides, like when you're side hilling on something very aggressive, it can tend to want to wash down the front end, but you can usually kind of steer up into that and help counteract that. Also, it can add drag to your electronics. Now, we did already put a brushless system in this, but even with the stock brushed motor, you can get away with a fair amount of overdrive before you really start taxing things too much. Out of the box, the VFD transmission that comes in the Fordyce has about 6.5% overdrive. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be installing this rear axle gear set, which is a 33 tooth ring gear and an 8 tooth pinion, and that's going to give us about 10% more overdrive, bringing us up to like that 16-17% range. This gear set is technically called an underdrive gear set, but underdriving the rear axle is just effectively the same as adding more overdrive. It's just a difference in naming. This is a lower gear ratio total for the rear axle. It's a good way to go rather than going overdrive and losing some reduction in your axle. Now, to install this rear axle gear set, we will also need to get one of these machined lockers. So using those two pieces, we're going to swap the gear in the rear axle. To do the rear axle gear swap, first you're going to remove the rear tires. After that, we're going to remove the upper and lower link screws, as well as the screws holding the shocks to the axle housing. This will allow the rear axle to come out of the vehicle. We can remove the drive shaft half from the pinion gear. And then we need to remove the 4 outer screws around the outside of the third member, as well as the 4 screws, 2 on either side of the rear axle caps. These are what hold the rear axle shafts into the housing. You can slide the rear axle shafts out, and then the third member will come straight out of the housing as well. From there, we need to remove the 4 screws holding the bearing retainers into the third member, and this will allow the ring gear and spool assembly to fall out separately, and then we can also remove the pinion gear. You can pull the bearing retainers off of the ring gear and spool assembly. Then we can open up our new machined spool and the new ring gear and pinion set. Included with the ring and pinion set, there is new hardware to attach it to the new spool. You'll want to use a little bit of Loctite on each of these 6 screws as you tighten the ring gear onto that spool. Once everything is nice and snug, you can replace the bearing and bearing retainers onto that ring gear assembly. Make sure that you put the new pinion gear into the housing. This is different than the pinion gear that came in the axle originally. The new gear ratio, 8/33, will be printed on the front side of that pinion gear. Put these back into the housing just like they came out and apply some grease to that new gear set. From there, we're just going to reverse all these steps to reinstall this back into the truck. So those were our updates for the week. We got a little bit of performance and a little bit of styling done. The new rear bed cage and the tailgate are going to be a big difference when it's out and about. Again, I'm not 100% sure which one. Personally, I like the lower profile one, I think, but the more traditional long back version, I know people like as well, but I'm leaning towards the low profile. Have to let me know which one you like best. And also, if we want to do any sort of like the bed rack thing, a tray that sits in that whole area that's got that overlanding style. Allow either, if you want to put things in it, you can. If you just want the style of it, it would be there as well. There's room, you could do a toolbox or things like that. I don't necessarily like that styling as much as the rack systems, but everyone's got their own preferences with that. I will have all of these files linked below, as well as the turbo stuff. I forgot to get that uploaded. I was super busy with travel and it just didn't happen. So everything will be uploaded and available as this video is up, I promise. I believe that I got a sneak peek of what Matt was doing from the Night Customs Instagram this week. So I think that Matt is tackling the interior of his truck, and that is my project for next week. I already have some parts in production for that in anticipation for next week's project. I'll be interested to see how Matt's turns out and the difference in style that he and I will go with. Make sure to go check out Matt's video for this week, see what he got done. I'll put a link to it in the description below. If you're enjoying the budget build off, absolutely hit the like button. Don't forget to check in Wednesday's live stream takeover. Watch us spin the wheel to determine what we get to spend next week. Hopefully, I get a better spin than Matt for once. Let's hope. With that, though, as always, thanks for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bells to see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.